All right, and it looks like we are live. Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us for tonight's program. This evening, we are going to be discussing the Library of Congress's National Audiovisual Conservation Center, which is headquartered here in Culpeper at the Packard campus. And tonight, our guest speaker is Gregory Lukow, who is the chief of the Packard campus, and he is going to be telling us a little bit about the history of the NAVCC here in Culpeper and what the facilities that they have there at the campus, the types of work that they do. If you have questions, you can enter them as a comment on the post here, and we will have a Q&A session towards at the end of his presentation. Please just remember that we are recording this session, and also because this is a public forum, please try to keep any of the comments or questions that you have respectful and be mindful of other people who might be participating in this program as well at home. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to you, Greg.
Thank you very much, John. Yes, I'm Gregory Lukow, Chief of the National Audiovisual Conservation Center, where, as John said, we are headquartered here at the Packard campus of the Library of Congress in Culpeper, Virginia. This beautiful, what we call our conservation building that you're looking at right now. We are in a couple locations. We have about 110 staff here at the Packard campus in Culpeper. And we have another 8 staff in our 2 research centers, which are located in the James Madison Memorial Building in Washington, D.C. And most significantly, we are linked by about 80 miles of fiber optic cable that connect our Packard campus digitization systems here in Culpeper to our research centers in DC. And it's actually in DC that our research patrons go to listen to our sound recordings and watch our moving image film and television programs. Now, John wanted me to present you with a kind of an inside look of what we do here at the Packard campus, but because I'm delivering this to the Museum of Culpeper History should enter into this presentation. So I wanted to put us in the context of the history of, it goes back quite a few years before the Packard campus was constructed. And it starts on Mount Pony, which itself has a long history. I'm sure many of the local Culpeper natives or even recent arrivals are aware of Culpeper's significant history within the Civil War. But my history doesn't begin quite that far back. It begins back in the late 1960s with the time when this facility that we're now working in, the Packard campus, was at the time a facility that belonged to the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. And what you're looking at now here is an aerial photograph of that Federal Reserve facility with etched in the 45 acres that we now occupy belongs to the federal government, the Library of Congress, legislative branch. And you can see the outlines. I'm sitting in this building right here in the center, and new construction off here to the left. So again, I want to put this in a little bit of historical context here. Here's some photographs of that original Federal Reserve building. This is a plaque that we saved after we demolished the original facility down to structural level. It's dated 1966, which is of interest to me. And I'll come back to that date. I don't know if this plaque was a launch of construction. It's not when the facility was dedicated, but we're going to go through some history here in a moment. We'll come back to this, but this plaque is now mounted on one of our walls in our main hallway here at the at the Packard campus as a memento from our own history. In the mid 1990s, the facility had been abandoned and there was a private sector company that was attempting to lease it for storage and office space. And the next couple of slides are going to show you are from that leasing advertising booklet. Shows you some more photographs, some of the interiors, some more of the exteriors. Again, they're trying to market this for office lease spaces. The facility was a Cold War era relic by the 1990s. It had approximately a 25-year lifespan between about 1967, 68, and 1993 when it was decommissioned by the federal government. What I'm showing you now is just a little summary of the Federal Reserve facility here in Culpeper that was published by the Brookings Institute online back in 2009. Just a little historical summary. I'm going to call your attention to some things. This one in particular, it was dedicated December 10th, 1969. Now that is different than 1967. So I'm going to hopefully explain that here in a little bit as we march through this Brookings Institute, some interesting things I want to highlight from this little article. And here, the 7 computers at the facility operated by the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond were the central node for American electronic funds transfers activities. That means transfers within banks. And I'm going to take a little detour now to an even older historical document, which states, as you can see, from September 1975. This is selected pages from a booklet that was promoting what it calls the Culpeper switch. That is the transfer hub for electronic communications between commercial banks in the Federal Reserve System around the country. And this booklet gives a little history of, it goes back to the 19-teens and 20s of how communications were first by Morse code and then by teletype and then by faster teletype and finally over AT&T phone lines. And in the 1950s, there were 2 hubs, one in Washington, D.C., one in Chicago. And it was decided that during the Cold War that it should move out of Washington, D.C. And so it moved to Richmond. The Chicago hub was done away with, and Richmond became the hub for the transfer of communications between banks around the country, Federal Reserve commercial banks. And in the early 1960s, they started looking for an alternate location to Richmond. And Culpeper became that alternate location. And I'm really fascinated by this booklet because, as you can see here, it does a metaphorical comparison to explain the Culpeper switch by comparing it to railroad junctions, railroad switches around the country. It's not something that we would make the comparison to in this much more modern, technologically digital age, but it was a fascinating comparison back that time. And it talks about the plans to transfer this central national hub for Federal Reserve Bank communications from Richmond to Culpeper. You'll see there on the left, the page, there's a sentence that says the decision to move the switch was made in 1967, which is after that plaque that I showed you earlier that was dated 1966. And as we saw, the facility wasn't dedicated until December 1969. And you could see here on the right-hand side page at the top, the first message sent from this new national Culpeper hub was in August 1970. And here is a picture, the last page of this booklet, that shows Culpeper as the hub for electronic communications between commercial banks, Federal Reserve commercial banks around the country. So with that little detour, let's go back to our Brookings Institute summary, it's worth noting that there were actually two main purposes. This purpose, to store several $billion worth of US currency at the Culpeper Federal Reserve Facility, was actually the first that was thought of. And the main reason this was initially identified and designed and built. The communications hub was a secondary. It came later. It was a recognition that there was something already being built in Culpeper. And so the Federal Reserve started thinking about adding in this fund transfer hub to the facility as well. Here are the vaults that those billions of dollars were stored in. The vault door leading into these cages. There were both bills, currency bills, and coins were stored here. Back to our Brookings Institute screen, there were dormitories where members of the Federal Reserve system could flee to in case of an attack on the eastern seaboard. And of course, the dormitories and the storage of the currency were all part of a coup situation, a continuity of operations by the federal government facility. It was a nuclear bomb-proof bunker designed to withstand an attack, nuclear holocaust kind of attack. And the money was stored here in order to repump the economy east of the Mississippi River in case of a nuclear holocaust. And with these offices and dormitories for the Reserve Bank staff to flee to in case of that attack, of course, which never happened. Finally, this last point is one of the more obscure, noteworthy features, as it calls it. The facility had a cold storage area for maintaining bodies unable to be promptly buried due to high radiation levels outside, an incinerator, an indoor pistol range, and a helicopter landing pad. All interesting little factoids that aren't usually mentioned when we talk about the history of this facility. So this is the original facility, and this is the site that we renovated, the portion of the facility that we renovated for collection storage. And originally, the idea of the Library of Congress in the mid-1990s was simply to convert that existing facility, which was a hardened bunker, remember, convert it to underground storage for the Library of Congress's films, television programs, videos, and sound recordings on scores of different formats. During the 1990s, the Library of Congress as a whole was in a bit of a crisis as much in its entire history up to that point in terms of running out of space to store all of its collections. Back then, it had about 130 million collections items. Today, it has closer to 180 million collection items. And it solved the problem for the audiovisual collections, which is those films, television programs, videos, sound recordings, by identifying this recently decommissioned facility in Culpeper and turning it into a storage facility for the Library of Congress. This is an aerial photograph taken in 2004 that shows the excavation underway. You can see the nuclear bomb-proof hardened bunker there in the center, now exposed. The construction project was a public-private sector partnership between the Library of Congress and the Packard Humanities Institute, and of course, the US Congress. The Packard Humanities Institute is headed by a man named David Woodley Packard. You'll see a photograph of him in a moment. David Woodley Packard is the son of David Packard of HP Computers, Hewlett Packard Computers. And Mr. Packard has a tremendous interest in historical, history, archaeology, not only in the United States, around the world. He's a former classics professor, and he views the nation's output of audiovisual, the historic songbook, the recordings of song and music, films from the golden age of Hollywood as the 20th century equivalent of the ancient Greek and Roman classics. And he has put his philanthropical support to that belief. This project started in 1997 when the US Congress passed a law authorizing a project in which these 45 acres on Mount Pony were transferred to Mr. Packard's private sector foundation, the Packard Humanities Institute. We call that PHI for short. And for the next 10 years, it was actually owned and operated by Mr. Packard's foundation. And he brought all of the architects and the design engineers and the construction teams to the table to consult with the Library of Congress in hundreds and hundreds of meetings of consultation to design an archive and library for the 21st century as close as possible to the ideal. And what started as just a conversion of this underground bunker grew in vision, a vision that was jointly shared by myself and my colleagues here at the library and Mr. Packard, into a much larger facility that wasn't just renovating the existing building, but was starting to build additional buildings. And you see here a few of the historic sites coming into being during the construction phase. Again, here you can see where the original facility was and the new construction. And in this next photo, you'll see all of the building components. I'm sitting in what's called the conservation building right there in the just slightly center left. That's where all of the staff are located. You'll see the collection storage building underground. That's where the former bunker was. There's a central plant that's newly constructed behind it. And nitrate vaults refers to special vaults that have to be built to store nitrate film. All motion pictures produced and distributed in theaters in the United States and around the world up until 1951 were produced on nitrate film stock. But nitrate film stock had one fatal flaw, which is highly flammable. And once it starts to burn, you cannot put it out. You can douse it in water, douse it in sand, douse it in foam, fire extinguishers, nothing will put out a nitrate fire. And because of that, it requires very special storage requirements according to the National Fire Protection Association. And those vaults is where our nitrate film is stored. More on that later. Here is a nice gleaming photo of the facility about to be finished. It looks different now. If you drive past this or you come back to our movies when we open shortly, I hope, you'll see it's a lot of trees have grown up and it's very much somewhat returned to its forested, original forested nature. So as I said, this was a unique partnership between the US Congress, the Library of Congress, and another federal agency, the Architect of the Capitol. The Architect of the Capitol is a legislative branch agency in the federal government that actually owns and operates all of the legislative branch buildings. It owns the US Capitol building and it operates, keeps the lights on, HVAC, mechanical, electrical, all of that. It does the same for all of the House and Senate office buildings. It does the same for all of the Library of Congress buildings, including the Packard campus here in Culpeper. Now, Mr. Packard ended up giving about $160 million to design and construct the entire campus. It was his, those construction crews and engineers reported to his managers. And what he did then was donate the finished facility back to the Library of Congress when it was all done, finished, and commissioned for occupancy. The US Congress poured in another $100+ million for all of the technologies, the new staff, the movement of the collections from other facilities to here in Culpeper. The Architect of the Capitol, as I said, provides ongoing operations and maintenance. And Mr. Packard's private sector gift is the largest donation ever made to the Library of Congress. And we did some research, and with the exception of the Smithsonian Institution, donated to the United States in the 1840s, the Packard campus, Mr. Packard's gift of the Packard campus to the Library of Congress, is the largest private sector gift to the United States government in the history of the Republic. So it's the second largest after the Smithsonian, a not insignificant factoid that we are very proud to trumpet. Here is the conveyance ceremony back in July of 2007. It was held in DC in the Library of Congress buildings. That is David Woodley Packard standing in the center of the table with his hands folded in front of him, surrounded by members of Congress, some still there, some no longer there. That's Nancy Pelosi, who was then Speaker of the House as well, to his to the right of him, former Majority Leader of the Senate, Harry Reid, other members of Congress, Senator John Warner there on the far right. The Librarian of Congress at the time, Dr. James Billington, is the second from the left, and the other members standing around the podium there in the center left are members of Mr. Packard's board of trustees for the Packard Humanities Institute. It was a nice ceremony. I was there. It's a significant moment in the history of the Library of Congress. So let's move into the inside look at what we do here at the Library of Packard campus, starting with the collections. This is what we store here in Culpeper. A lot of content, and we're going to break these three collection areas down. We're going to deal with them one at a time, starting with the moving image collections, which, as you can see, comprised of films, newsreel, television, video, a broad range of film, disc, videotape formats, video games, and born digital file materials coming in that never have a physical medium. They're produced as digital files and acquired as digital files. This is our foundation collection. The paper print collection at the Library of Congress is a fascinating little story. We first began receiving films from Thomas Edison, yes, from Thomas Edison in 1893. But at the time, Thomas Edison and the other film producers that were just, it was a nascent industry. They were just starting to make films. And they wanted to submit them for copyright because the Library of Congress, as I'm sure you know, is also the home of the US Copyright Office. But the copyright law at the time in the 1890s did not acknowledge that you could register a celluloid motion picture film for copyright, because indeed, when that copyright law was written prior to the 1890s, motion picture film didn't exist. So the only way in which Thomas Edison and his peers in the first from 1890s up until 1912 could submit a film for copyright was by transferring the celluloid to rolls of photographic contact paper, like you are looking at here. We have over 3,300 of those early paper print reels of film. Ironically, it has provided us with one of the best documented early histories of the cinema, 1890s and 19-teens, up through the teens, of any country in the world. Much of the celluloid of these same 3,300 films does not exist. It only exists on paper prints. Here are a range of the film and video formats that we acquire. And yes, that is the exact same video game there along the bottom on 7 different gaming platforms. Shows you the range of material that we collect just in that category alone. Kinds of things that come in through copyright deposits, a diverse range of formats. We have scores, if not hundreds, of actual formats in both the moving image and the sound recording format history going back to the 1890s. So audiovisual material has been with us for about 132 years now, close to, on scores, as you can imagine, of formats. We get lots of gift acquisitions donated to us, and we got to process them, got to take them out of the original containers, put them in new archival containers, and store them until we're ready to process all of that incoming content. We also get material through copyright, which, let's call that a mint collection of American creativity, that as producers around the country, creators are making the content, submitting it to copyright, gives us a new copy at the point of the creation, the production of the film, the television program, the sound recording, the music, etc. That's an endless stream of tubs large and tubs small coming into us here at the Packard campus every week, every month, that we have to process as well. We have to do the cataloging. Here's just a minimum level of metadata, as we call it, to catalog and make it identifiable and discoverable by our patrons, in this case for one episode of the 30 Rock television series. Just gives you a sense of the data that we have to enter into databases as well. We have a very vigorous film loans program. Libraries loan books, everybody knows that, but we loan films as well. We average about 330 films that we loan to other venues around the world. And you can see the number that are registered with us in both the US and overseas. And we do register the theaters with us. We treat the loan of 35 millimeter print of film to another venue, much as a museum would treat the loan of a Picasso painting to another museum. You have to register with us. You have to verify you have the appropriate projection systems. You have to have training by your projectionists, et cetera, et cetera. But we are one of the last sources for the ever dwindling number of theaters around the world that still are dedicated to showing film as film on celluloid rather than totally conversion to digital cinema. And that's what this film loans program services. Our second major collecting area, recorded sound collections. Here are just a few of the formats we'll walk through here: disc, cylinder, tape, and again, digital file. This is a room where we can inspect different copies of the same recording to make sure that we're keeping the best quality, the least scratches, the least amount of groove wear in terms of these kinds of 78 RPM discs. This is one of our most fascinating recorded sound collections, the Universal Music Group collection. Universal Music is one of now the three main still existing giant music producing record labels in the country. And about 10 years ago, they gave us the largest recorded sound collection donation that we'd ever received, for 100,000 items, including what I refer to here as metal masters. Let me explain what this means. You see on the left, a piece of metal. That's a master recording of Louis Armstrong's Swing That Music. And here on the right, you can see the 78 RPM disc version of it. This metal is the master. It's called a stamper that produces the shellac recording that's sold in stores. This metal on the left is not something you can buy. It's what produces everything that you can buy in stores, or you could buy back in the days when 78 RPM disc was the way the nation listened to music. And so this metal master is the best quality sound that you can get to preserve when you want to preserve a recording of Louis Armstrong Swing That Music. Our NBC collection is a radio collection. It's the largest surviving collection of any of the main radio networks that were active from the 1920s into the present, actually. More than CBS or ABC or Dumont. It is the largest surviving radio collection. And this gives you a summary of it here. Finally, that third category of material that we collect, millions of audiovisual reference documents, largely on paper. As you can see here, screenplays, photographs, posters, copyright deposit records, press kits, trade periodicals, corporate papers, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the three collection areas. But we also collect not just physical material, but also born digital collections. These are some of our most significant born digital collections. Saturday Night Live, you all know. Vanderbilt Television News Archive has been preserving television newscasts since 1969. We have a partnership with them. We are the preservation archive for all the digital files that they have created originally from their videotapes, and now they capture them as digital files. History Makers is a Black oral and video history organization based in Chicago, and the American Archive of Public Broadcasting is a collaboration that we have with WGBH Television, public television up in Boston, and a little bit more about that in the future. We also are responsible for preserving digital file copies of the US House and the US Senate floor proceedings going back to the 1980s, as well as select House of Representatives committee hearings going back to about 1912. Now, obviously, we were collecting those floor proceedings on videotape going back in the 1980s and 1990s, even into the 2000s. We've converted nearly all of those videotapes to digital files, preservation master files, and are now collecting them as files. Some recent highlights in the Born Digital acquisitions. Most of these highlights I'm going to be giving you are from fiscal year 2021. Just give you a sense of the scale of some of the Born Digital acquisitions that we acquired in that last fiscal year. But we also must collect the equipment to play back and digitize from. That includes newish equipment. I mean, some of these things you're looking at here are relatively new, but they're already obsolete, as well as very old equipment. In the case of the next several photographs, you're going to see some antique audio equipment, microphones here. And this is an original lathe that you would produce a transcription, what's called a transcription disc, a live recording onto disc, that was actually in operation in the Library of Congress beginning back in the 1940s. Collection storage has to be very precise and cold and dry. And that former Federal Reserve building is where we store most all of the collections in these temperature and relative humidity environments, which are very good. They're state of the art. This is our first floor of the collection storage building. That's where we store all the moving image vaults. These are where we store the films and videotapes. You just see some pictures of them here. They're wide open space storage vaults where we have outfitted them with high density mobile compact shelving that you're looking at here. Excuse me. The second floor is where we store all of our sound recordings, LPs, audio tapes, compact discs in these cabinets. We also store DVDs and cassettes in cabinets like this. And this is just a look down the main hallway of the second floor of the former Federal Reserve facility. Again, we demolished it down to structural level. All that we left were the floor slabs and the supporting columns, and then we rebuilt the vault spaces in between them. But this gives you a sense of the scale. That's over 100 yards long, longer than a football field, with vaults on either side. So it's a large building, and it stores 99% of our collections. What about the other 1%? Well, that's our approximately 140,000 reels of nitrate film. I told you about that a little earlier. It has special fire code regulations, can only be stored in relatively small, discrete vaults, can't have wide open space vaults like I was just showing you in the main collection storage building. Has to be limited by volume of nitrate, and that's why we have 124 of these vaults for 1% of the collection versus 35 vaults in the original Federal Reserve building, which is 99% of the collection. So just the unique nature of nitrate film that requires it to be stored in this manner, because this is what can go wrong with nitrate film. It can start to bubble, ooze off gas. The bubbly jelly starts to turn into a crusty powder, which ultimately turns into an inert dust. That's what we're on guard against with nitrate film. To preserve the collections, this is the third floor of our Packard campus. This is devoted to our 3 preservation laboratories: film lab, a video lab, and an audio lab for our sound recordings. You'll see lots of interesting shapes and spaces and rooms on this floor. This was the real genius of the Packard campus. Building it was designing this floor to maximize the preservation throughput of millions of collection items in different kinds of rooms. I'm going to give you a virtual tour of some of these rooms. This is one of our critical listing rooms, where maximum operator intervention, one digital stream at a time. So the operator in this room is listening every second of the sound recording that he or she is transferring, is digitizing. We have other rooms where you can batch up to 8 digital streams at a time, cassettes, audio tapes, so that you're quality controlling by kind of ABCDing through them and listening to them in sequence periodically. It's a higher throughput. Some of the highlights of the audio laboratory, a year or two ago, we finished building out our first ever multi-track audio preservation room. And it was more than significant. It was and truly appropriate that we used a recent gift to the library, the Les Paul collection, to build out a multi-track audio preservation room, because Les Paul invented multi-tracking on disc, not on tape, which is how it's done more recently, or digital, how it's done today, but on discs back in the late 1940s. And we have his entire collection. So we're able to reconstitute his multi-track recordings in this multi-track audio preservation room. This is our video lab, just a few scenes from it. This is where we do expert presentation on very difficult formats like 2-inch tape, which was the very first videotape format invented by Ampex back in the mid to late 1950s. This is a higher throughput room, a lot of plug and play, patch panel based transfers from disc and cassette formats along this wall. And this is our highest throughput digital preservation in the entire campus. These are robots. They are robots that transfer 24 hours a day video cassettes. You'll see through this glass window there are cassette decks, and there's a robot arm, a gripper that'll take a tape from this upper and the upper top through the glass. You'll see this. It's a 4-sided rotating carousel that you fill with tapes. The robot puts a tape into each of the decks, waits till it's done digitizing through playback, puts the tape back, takes the next tapes, keeps going round and round the carousel until the entire robot is digitized. And that gives us 10-fold levels of increased throughput for preservation production than doing it the old-fashioned way by hand, manually with operators. The third of our film labs, the preservation lab, film preservation lab. Here's somebody inspecting and repairing a reel of film. After that, those repairs are done, it's taken into a printing room where the film is either the old film is either transferred to new raw film stock produced by Kodak and then developed, or it is ready, prepared for digital scanning. Producing digital files as the preservation master rather than a new celluloid copy. And this is our film processing laboratory. This is where it's like you've probably seen movies where a mystery photograph is being developed in somebody's basement, and the killer in the back of the photograph is revealed and the mystery is solved, and the photograph is swishing around in some chemicals in a dark room, and it suddenly comes into the detective's line of sight and he figures out the mystery. Well, this is how you process motion picture film. The chemicals are pulled through this pulley-based hydraulic system through a developing chemical, a fixing chemical, a wash bath. The cabinets you see here are the dryers where the film is dried up. And when you spool up, you're either producing a new negative or a new print, positive print from whatever you started from. This will probably be the last of these wet film processing labs produced and constructed in North America, because, as you know, celluloid is giving way to all digital. When you go to a movie theater, chances are you are seeing a digital file. You're not seeing a motion picture film. The exceptions are a few mainstream Hollywood directors: Christopher Nolan, Quentin Tarantino, J.J. Abrams, Steven Spielberg, who all remain committed to shooting film on film and have literally kept Kodak from going bankrupt by convincing the Hollywood studios to continue to support Kodak to make film stock. But how long that will last and how long before everything is digital is anybody's guess, not mine. Here's some highlights from the film laboratory recently, some of the films that we've produced through support of Martin Scorsese's private sector, the Film Foundation. We did our first full digital restoration on famous director King Vidor's Hallelujah from 1929, a film that's on the Library of Congress National Film Registry. More about that in a moment. And a big epic drama from 1927 called The Fire Brigade with some wonderful color sequences, which we hope to showcase here at our Packard Campus Theater in the near future. Now, we produce a lot of digital content, as you've seen from these various rooms up on our third floor. And those digital files are all stored in our data center, one of 4 data centers that the Library of Congress has. One of them is entirely here at the Packard campus. And we store more content here than in any of the other Library of Congress data centers. The other data centers have many times more millions of files than we do here. We have about 9 million files stored here. But our files are so much bigger because they're coming from audiovisual content, especially film and video, not from paper content. We have, oops, John, I have just lost, I have to restart my PowerPoint. I have no idea what happened here. Give me a moment. Can you hear me, John? John, can you hear me? Am I still on your Zoom?
Sorry, Greg, I was muted. Yeah, I can still hear you. I can still see you on Zoom.
Can you see the PowerPoint now? I'm back up and running. I don't know, it just crashed and I'm now back up and running.
I do not see the PowerPoint.
Okay, that means I have to reshare the screen. Just a moment. Do you see it now?
Yes, I can see it now.
Okay. Oof, I'm sorry about that. Hope I've
That's
only
all
lost,
right. It's, you know, it's the world we live in.
Hope I've only lost a minute or so there. Let me get back to where I was. Almost there. I was just talking about the amount of content that we have to store here.
Mm-hmm.
We're not talking megabytes or gigabytes or even terabytes. We're talking petabytes. A petabyte is 1,000 terabytes. And we have a total of about 14, almost 15 petabytes in these robotic data tape libraries. These are the libraries. This is what they look on the inside. They hold thousands of these data tapes. Each one of these tapes you're looking at, and each of these slots holds 8.5 terabytes of content. So we have about 9,900 slots. 8.5 terabytes of tape comes out to about 85 petabytes of capacity on the floor. As indicated, we have about 15 petabytes in storage. We produce about 125 terabytes every month, a petabyte and a half every year. Nobody is preserving audiovisual content at that scale in North America and probably the world. So those are very impressive numbers when it comes to audiovisual preservation. Here are some key metrics from our last complete fiscal year. The number of items we acquired, processed, cataloged, produced master files from, and I'm very proud of this last highlighted figure. Since we opened up our digital preservation systems about a decade ago, we have over 600,000 of our audiovisual collection items have been reformatted. Now that doesn't sound like a lot compared to the 5.5 million items that we have, but it's over 10%. And we've been focusing on the most endangered, the most highly sought after. So that is a really good head start. And believe me, nobody is producing at that scale anywhere in North America. Here are some other major programs areas I want to make sure that you're aware of. As I mentioned, our two research centers, the Moving Image and the Recorded Sound Research Centers, is where you go to listen to or watch our collection items. They're both located in the library's Madison building on Capitol Hill. We have a national screening room. We have over 400 films on this collection. These are not Hollywood movies. We're not in competition with the Hollywood production studios, but these are rarities that you really won't see anywhere else. Many of them aren't even, even on YouTube. We invite you to go and browse. There's a lot of really fascinating content that really looks at the history and culture of America from perspectives outside of the major Hollywood film productions. A recent highlight of our national screening room is we recently reached an agreement with Paramount Pictures to take about 100 of the silent films that they produced in this period between 1914 and 1930 to digitize them and put them online on our national screening room. We're in the process of preparing those films, scanning them and producing them for uploading now, where it's a long-term process, but we're hoping to upload starting soon. And this is the first time any of the major Hollywood studios has ever allowed such broad online access, even to its silent film holdings. We also have a series of co-branded DVD and Blu-ray releases, just a few examples that you're looking at here. We're very proud of these two multi-box sets of pioneers of African-American cinema and pioneers of first women filmmakers. Most nearly all of the content on those two multi-Blu-ray disc sets came from the Library of Congress. In addition to a national screening, we have a national jukebox. And this is just one little feature. You can go do the national jukebox day by day. I did yesterday, May 18th, when I put this slide together. And if you continue scrolling down this page, you'll see the recordings that are on the national jukebox that were produced year by year, beginning in this case in 1904. This is from the first 30 years of acoustical recording. It's the years that are more now in the public domain, so we can put them online rights free, but it's wonderful listening to a lot of recordings that haven't been heard in many decades, but were what our grandparents and their parents were listening to day in and day out back in those days. Recent highlight, a year ago, we dramatically upgraded and expanded the National Jukebox with a new URL, a new user-friendly player, and the addition of over 4,000 recordings from an early Columbia label. That allows listeners to hear recorded sound treasures, especially by Black performers that had been unavailable for many decades. The American Archive of Public Broadcasting, I mentioned earlier, we have tens of thousand hours of public television and radio that we've digitized, many of which are put online for viewing from the 1950s, 60s, 70s, available on this website. Again, this is a collaboration that we've been at for about 7 or 8 years now with WGBH Public Television in Boston. Wonderful viewing online, listening as well. I recommend that if you're interested in the history and culture of this country from perspectives that you don't always see on network television. A couple of highlights from the AAPB. We have statewide consortia in Kansas and New Mexico, a dozen different entities between those two states who've come together to produce well over 10,000 programs for us, again, going back in the history of their collections from those two states. We're constantly launching new online collections and online exhibits as part of our AAB website. So I encourage you to look at those collections and exhibits. We're also responsible for administering the Ken Burns Prize for Film, formerly known by the Library at the title of the Library of Congress, Levine Ken Burns Prize for Film. This is an annual ceremony that takes place in September in collaboration with the Better Angels Society, which receives probably over 100 applicants every year. There's a review process to select 6 finalists, and the Librarian of Congress, Dr. Carla Hayden, and Ken Burns, in consultation with this prestigious jury, make the final selection. We're entering into our 4th year. These are the titles that won the Ken Burns Prize during the first 3 years. And last year, we also launched a film showcase website that presents online and in their entirety past winners and finalists of the prize for a 5-day screening room in conjunction with the annual prize ceremony. These are all documentaries in the spirit of Ken Burns, and some wonderful work that's being produced. Our National Film Preservation Board and our National Recording Preservation Board are each associated with a National Film Registry and a National Recording Registry. The board advises the Library of Congress on preservation-related issues to our film and moving image heritage and our recorded sound heritage, but each of the boards has an affiliated registry. And this is the web page for the film registry. You can click this little button right there in the middle. It says nominate. You can nominate films to the National Film Registry. Every year, the Librarian of Congress names 25 new films to the registry. It's a public nominations process, which is filtered through the advisory board, which is filtered up through to Dr. Hayden, who makes the final selection. And a lot of times there have been community support for public nominations that have resulted in titles being named to the registry. A great example is about 10 years ago, middle schools in the state of Indiana got together and sent in many nominations for the mid-1980s film Hoosiers. It's a basketball film starring Gene Hackman and Dennis Hopper. And by golly, with that kind of public support, we named the film to the National Film Registry. The registry does not compete with the Oscars or other such contemporary awards programs. Film has to be at least 10 years old to be eligible, and it has to be of cultural, aesthetic, or historic significance to the United States and its citizens. And here are just a few of the titles that have been named. We have getting close to 800 titles now on the National Film Registry. And the same for the National Recording Registry of sound recordings. Again, you can nominate. We're over 500 titles on the recording registry, which started about a decade after the film registry. So it has less on it, but there are so many more sound recordings that have been produced in this country than films. So the territory is wide open for interesting nominations, again, from the public. We welcome you to look at that and make your own nominations. And the Packard campus here in Culpeper is written into the congressional legislation that enacted both of these boards. They have affiliated national plans for the preservation of moving image and sound recordings. And you can see the wording in the law that ties the National Audiovisual Conservation Center here in Culpeper to the ongoing implementation of national plans for the preservation of our film and recorded sound heritage. Now I'm almost done. We're going to open it up to questions or comments in a moment. I want to show you our Packard Campus Theater and the interior of the theater, and our organ, which you can see there is an exact reproduction of a 1929 model Mighty Wurlitzer organ. It's an electronic digital reproduction of a 1929 Mighty Wurlitzer organ. The theater seats 205 people. We have been closed since March of 2020 because of the pandemic. We are looking to reopen later this summer. We have a number of things that we have to get back up and running again. We've got to make sure our safety and security protocols for both the patrons and the staff are all identified in place and clearly delineated. We have to get our licensing agreements paid for and renewed to show the films that are not in the public domain. We've got to get projectionist schedules lined up, but we're working at that. And by later this summer, we are definitely hoping, conditions allowing, to reopen our theater for our screenings, which are free and open to the public on the weekends. So stay tuned is the best I can say, but I am optimistic that we'll have something opening soon at the Packard campus. That is the end of my presentation. Questions, and I will leave you with this. And if you are interested in looking at any of those websites that I was showing there towards the end, you can take a picture of this screen and check them out for yourself. So, John, I'm done. Let's open it up for any questions or comments that have come in.
Yeah, well, I think the most frequent question was the one you just answered about when public programs would restart their on campus, and I know everyone is eagerly anticipating that. I know I certainly am. I'm really just stunned and amazed by the amount of material that you have there, and as a pop culture junkie, particularly with film and sound, I'm really eager to get in there at some point in time. I do have a question. Your storage space, how much of that are you currently using, and like percentage wise, what is filled, and what do you have remaining in terms of expansion?
Yeah, the area that we're most crunched on in terms of storage space is our nitrate vaults.
Mm-hmm.
We only have the equivalent of a couple, three of those vaults remaining empty. And one of the ways in which nitrate film has been preserved in the United States is through repatriations of films that survive in other countries around the world and have been kept there and end up in archives in other nations around the world for decades. Films that do not survive in the United States often survive in other countries because in the 1920s, the 30s, the 40s, they were distributed around the world and didn't make sense. The studios didn't need to pay to bring them back, so they just stayed there. We have a number of repatriation partners in Europe, and particularly that we have identified a number of films we'd like to bring back. But we're kind of consolidating the short reels in individual cans and putting them into bigger cans so that we can free up space so that we could resume some of those repatriations. But that is one of the areas where we are pretty full up. The main collection storage building, Mr. Packard built out the first two floors. You saw them for the moving image and recorded sound collections. The third floor, there is a third floor. It was left as shell space. It is currently filled up with boxes of unprocessed collections and obsolete audiovisual equipment that we store. It is remaining to be filled out as vaults. That is not on the library's agenda to ask Congress for the money to do that, but it can be done, and that will really add a lot of additional high-density mobile compact shelving vault space whenever we reach the point where that becomes necessary. So we're not there yet in the main collection storage building. There is some space that we're still able to manage in that building.
Good. I don't see any other questions. I'll just put a final call out there to anyone who might be watching. If you have a question, you can type it into the comments of the stream here. Okay. Here we have a question. How is the current digital nature of AV impacting storage areas like YouTube, etc.?
Well, digital storage is very different than storing physical items on shelves. I spoke to our digital storage here, which is in a data center. It's a robotic data tape library with petabytes of content, but we're not the only ones dealing with large scale digital storage. Hollywood, the banks, the medical industries all have gigantic digital storage challenges, and that's what various cloud services are increasingly servicing, Amazon and others. The Library of Congress is very cautious and very careful when it comes to cloud storage for its collections. The library has, as a part of the federal government, has very vigorous IT security protocols that it must adhere to, not only to protect the collections, but just to protect the information in all of our systems in general. And that's one reason that they're being very cautious. The library's looking at cloud for application hosting, for example, but moving to collection storage is something that they're investigating very cautiously. Although other industries around the country are certainly moving to cloud storage when they don't have the wherewithal to build their own, as we have here, petabyte level databases. I hope I addressed that question.
Someone else is asking if you could email the links that you had on this last page there. I'll say to that this recording is going to remain on this Facebook page, and at some time we'll be posting the recording to the museum's website and to the museum's YouTube page. So from those sources, you could do a screen capture of these links for your future reference.
Yeah, and I'm happy to give you a copy of this PowerPoint too. I mean, you'll have it. You have the recording, but in a Zoom meeting, I would normally be inserting links into the chat, but that's not what this was set up to do. So that's why I suggested even just taking a picture of the page or Googling a lot of these things will take you right to them.
Here's another question. What types of photographic records do you have at the Conservation Center?
Well, that's interesting. The library has another separate division from us. It's called the Prints and Photographs Division. It is responsible for the photography collections of the Library of Congress, millions of collection items there as well, some of which are stored here at the Packard campus. But the only photographs that are stored here by our Prints and Photographs divisions are their nitrate flat film. In other words, the film that was shot on nitrate photograph, flat film, still photograph stock, even as our motion pictures are stored on nitrate in our nitrate vaults. So we have 6 of those 124 nitrate film vaults that are actually devoted to the library's nitrate still photograph collections. And that includes some of the most famous recordings in our history, the 1930s Works Progress Administration photos from around Dorothea Lange's Migrant Mother, the original camera negative to that incredibly famous iconic photograph is stored here at the Packard campus, for example.
Other question, this is building off the earlier one that you answered just a few minutes ago. We have someone asking, to what degree do you preserve things that that appear on platforms like YouTube, TikTok, or Facebook, or is it just things that come in and are copyrighted that you store there?
Well, we have authority under the U.S. copyright law to capture unpublished audiovisual transmissions. Unpublished is key because a lot of what's on Facebook is not published. It's not available for sale to the general public. So we have authority to capture that. That's a program that we have not technologically fully built out yet, although we have some prototyping that we've been doing for it. For a better part of a decade, we've been acquiring web talk radio off of the web, not off of radio, FM and AM, but off of the web. We capture digital files through sound cards on computer stations. And you could go to our Recorded Sound Research Center. It's a list of every web talk radio program we've recorded for the better part of the last decade, with a focus on political talk radio, not just the well-known syndicated, but what's political talk radio doing in Milwaukee or Seattle or Austin, Texas. It's sort of building a mosaic of what the culture on political talk radio is doing, for example. So YouTube, there's so much on YouTube that's already been published and made available to the public. Otherwise, we wouldn't go after that. When we develop this authority in terms of the technology more fully, it'll give us the opportunity to acquire the unpublished, the memes of the month, that you'd like to capture to make sure that they're preserved for future posterity, so that people know what the culture was obsessed with month to month in general. Hope that makes sense.
No, sounds good. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions. But no, that was, we're getting a lot of compliments through the comments. A lot of people thanking you for the presentation. I know I really enjoyed it. Very informative. So, so thank you again, Greg.
You're most welcome.
Thanks
You're
again.
most welcome. I enjoyed it too.
Thanks again to everyone who was watching, and I'm going to end the live stream now.
Thank you, and good night to everybody.